Bruce Fordyce, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks, Dylan. Apologies for yesterday when I was supposed to be there, but we got it right eventually.
We got it right. Thank goodness. And very, very excited to have you on the show. And a big thank you to Doug Emsley who helped set this up. But quickly, where does the podcast find you? Are you at home in South Africa?
I'm at home in what we call our Parkrun office, because Parkrun's really big here in South Africa. So we head up the whole country. Yeah. So I'm in the office, but it's kind of it's a upper floor of part of our house. So that's where I'm at the moment. And I can tell you there's a big, what we call a high felt thunderstorm building up. And see the sky's going black, and we could have a bit of noise in the background soon.
Okay. Well, that'll only add to the ambiance of the conversation. I'm curious, Bruce, to start. Obviously, you're well known as being a great South African ultra running champion, 9-time Comrades winner. But I read that you were raised in Hong Kong. And so I wanted to start there and maybe allow you to speak a little bit about your upbringing there in Asia and how that's maybe informed the person that you became and the athlete that you became.
So it's not true to say I was brought up in Hong Kong. I was born there. Oh. My father was a soldier in the British Army. He was South African, but because South Africa is part of the Commonwealth, any Commonwealth citizen can become a soldier in the British Army. You just swear allegiance to the crown. So he wanted to see the world. So he was posted to a regiment called the Gurkhas, who were based in Hong Kong. But then I probably spent most of the earliest time of my childhood in Singapore and Malaya, as it was in those days. Mm. And then I went to school in England. So I went to school in Canterbury and Kent. And then eventually when my father retired from the army, we returned to South Africa. So, and kind of rest of my upbringing was Johannesburg.
Okay. Well, thanks for the quick background, and it's good to understand a little bit more about that. Did that sort of lifestyle of, being the son of somebody who's in the army and bouncing around between, sounds like Europe and Asia and South Africa, did that inform or influence, the lifestyle that you pursued athletically or personally?
I don't think so. It's probably turned me into somebody now that we've been living. My wife and I and our family have lived in this house that I'm in now since 1988. So maybe it made me not want to travel around too much anymore. After you make friends and you lose friends, and you make new friends and you lose them. So I'm here. That's it. Yeah. Well, not that I don't travel. I mean, I travel a lot, but it's kind of, this is it. I can see, because of what's happening with property market and stuff like that. Yeah. That one day the neighbors will notice there's just a really horrible smell coming from our house, and they'll find out that we're both dead. We'll die here probably.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not for many, many years.
No, not for a while yet. Don't intend to yet. Yeah.
Before we get to Comrades and the running stuff, I'd love to also allow you to talk a little bit about, sort of your career coming up before you achieved this fame as being a multiple-time Comrades finisher. I read also that you were sort of involved in mining and archaeology and things like that. So I'd love for you to sort of talk a little bit about how that.
So I do know, from the running point of view, I was very influenced by the 1968 Olympic Games, because I was at school in England then, and we had television. We only had black and white in those days, black and white TV. But the 68 Olympics made a big impression on me, because they were quite a breakthrough Olympics. If you look at some of the stuff that went on, like the emergence of the East Africa as a major power, people like Kip Keino and Naftali Temu and Mama Walder. And then, I mean, there'd already been a hint in the Olympics before in Tokyo 64, but I was too young to really appreciate that. But 68 then. And then there were also those breakthroughs, with Bob Beamon from the US giving that incredible long jump that stood forever and ever and ever. Yeah. And then Dick Fosbury going backwards over the bar. That that had never been done before. So that was Jimmy Hines in the 100 meters. Just a whole lot of events that were just stood out as being remarkable. And then, of course, the Black Power salute of Tommy Smith and John Carlos, that I think they were the 200 meter winners. Anyway, but yeah, so then at school, I played all sorts of sports, but the sports that South Africans play. So soccer, football, rugby a lot. I mean, rugby, you've got to be huge. So I'm small, but I still enjoyed it. I enjoyed it right through until my final year at school. I played cricket very badly. And I realized only later in life that I had poor eyesight. I mean, now I can see you because I've got contact lenses in, but I just couldn't see that ball. So I would have been hopeless at baseball if I'd played that. But it always returned to athletics. Whenever there was athletics, I would do well. So, my final 2 years at school, in my senior years, I won the school cross country, and anything that was 1,500 meters or longer, I would win it. But I was at a school for poets and writers and artists and creative people. Yeah. So that just winning at my school didn't mean that you could be world class or anything. It was just well done. But sure, most of the guys you're competing against weren't interested. So then the archaeology was that I went to university here in Johannesburg, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. So many people have an idea of their career and they go straight into it. I just had no idea. I had a whole lot of things that I knew I didn't want to do. But so what I did was just pursue a general BA degree and follow the subjects that I found interesting, like history, archaeology, English, those kind of things. And I got my degree. I mean, I wasn't a stellar student, but on the other hand, I didn't ever fail anything or whatever. I didn't have to repeat anything. So, and then my first job was working in the archaeology department as a research officer, doing a lot of work with, humankind was born in Africa. So the earliest fossil record is here, stretching up the Rift Valley. But I also worked in Bushman San rock art. And then at the same time, I started to run. And at a certain point, those two things intersected, and the running, just the athletics and the running offered far more.
Yeah. So I want to hear, I'm assuming that moment probably coincided with when you started winning Comrades basically every year.
Yeah. So there was no prize money, and it was very amateur in those days. But when I won my third Comrades, I had a spectacular win where I was really, really strong, and I won by 15 minutes. I was 15 minutes clear of the second guy. It was televised live up until then, the Comrades had been shown on television, but only a packaged version of the race, like a month later or 2 weeks later. And suddenly in 83, they went live. And in contrast to the other runners that day, I looked great and I had a great run. And the next day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing, Really? It was all, got a television endorsement. And even though it was very amateur, there was a lot of below the table stuff where people would say, well, if you wear our shoes, we'll pay you X a month. And,
sure.
And that started the next day. And that was kind of it. I just knew that was the way to go. And then I wanted to get a proper job. I did want to get a proper job. And I was very jealous of some of my friends who were earning what for me was big money in those days. But my parents, both of them, said to me, just stick with this running.
Yeah.
Because in fact, my mother's words were, you are uncommonly good at very long distances and you need to keep doing it because the stuff is going to come from that.
Yeah. It's always good to pursue things that you're uncommonly good at. Before we get to more of your story with Comrades, of course, you're going to be speaking to a mostly American audience here and mostly a trail running audience. And so I'd love for you as sort of an unofficial ambassador for the race to explain a little bit about the history of the event in South Africa and the significance to the sporting culture.
So I'm trying to think, at the risk of exaggeration, the Comrades would be like the Super Bowl, but not as big. Obviously, the Super Bowl is massive, but it would be the same in the country in that the whole country stops to watch it. And they will watch it on television, even people who are not one iota interested in sport. It's just a huge event. And everybody knows that somebody who's running or they have run or their loved one is running. So essentially what it is, It's a bizarre race because it's a road. It's called the Comrades Marathon. It shouldn't be called a marathon. It should be called an ultra marathon because it's plus minus 90 kilometers. So 56 miles or so. But why I say plus minus is every year the distance changes slightly because of the road alterations and slight detours and things that change. Between two cities in a province, so that would be a state called KwaZulu-Natal, and those are the cities of Pietermaritzburg and Durban. And it was started in 1921 by an ex-soldier called Vic Clapham, who wanted to have some event to commemorate his fellow soldiers from the First World War who he had lost, the people who had died in the First World War. South Africa was very involved in the First World War as part of the Commonwealth, and plenty of South Africans died. And so he started this race to commemorate it. That's why it's called the Comrades of the First World War. And the first event in 1921, that's how long it took him to get it going. I think he got a £10 grant from the local government, and he bought a trophy, and I think 30 people, plus minus 30 people ran. And it was, the first winner was a runner called Bill Rowan, and it will always be the slowest winning time in the history of the race. But from the start, certain traditions started to emerge, and one of those is that the race changes direction every year.
Yeah.
So it goes up from the city of Durban, which is on the Indian Ocean, 1 year to Pietermaritzburg, which is quite a climb all the way up into the high country in Pietermaritzburg, and the next year it goes down from Pietermaritzburg to Durban. So that's one of the traditions. The other is that when you have run it 10 times, they retire your number forever. You are given your number, and it's called a green number. You can continue to run, and when you run, your number is colored green, which tells everybody that you have done 10 or more.
Wow. Cool.
Yeah, then there are different medals. So there's not just one. I've done quite a few of the US races. You run New York, you get a finisher's medal. That's it. Doesn't matter what time you did. You've got it.
Yeah.
In the Comrades, there are different medals to signify different times. So you'll get a top 10 runners get a gold medal. And then anyone from there until 7.5 hours, they get a silver medal. And then from 7.5 hours to 9 hours, you get a Bill Rowan medal named after Bill Rowan because he was the first winner. And you could have said you won the first Comrades. And I'm going to leave out a whole lot of stuff, but the start is probably one of the most dramatic starts of any marathon in the world, and I've run plenty of them. It starts with a national anthem, then it has a working song that the workers sing called Shosholoza. Everybody sings it, and then there is Chariots of Fire from the movie. They play the music of Chariots of Fire, and then there's a cockerel crow. A man called Max Trimborn used to start the race with the cockerel crow. He died in 1985, but they recorded him. So they still start the race with the cockerel crow. And then you go. And that's very, very emotional. And so the race took a long time to grow. It was very small, but just significant. And it reflected South Africa's politics of the time, the apartheid policy, because for most of its life, the race was a strictly white, male-only race.
Right.
So white males only. Only from 1975 onwards, women and runners of color, black runners, were then allowed to run from 1975 onwards.
Yeah.
And so now the race truly reflects the demographics of South Africa, and it's grown from those 30 people who ran the first Comrades now to, I'm sure next year's race will have 25,000, 30,000. Yeah, so it's unique in that it's the size almost, not quite as big, but almost as one of the big major city marathons around the world, but it's an ultra.
Yeah.
And 90% of those people will finish.
Yeah.
And sorry, I left off the tradition that probably is one that is least understood, particularly by US runners and by runners overseas, is that it is 12 hours. And at 12 hours, exactly 12 hours, a significant official or a dignitary or somebody who's been selected walks out onto the finish line, turns his or her back on all the runners who are coming in, and at the stroke of 12 hours fires a gun. And when that gun goes, if your foot is 1 inch away from the line, you are not a finisher. Come back next year. Good luck.
Come back next year. Amazing.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah. So that's brutal, but it's probably the finest moment of the race, because it shows the Comrades runners that they're truly heroic, because they're trying to get across that line.
Yeah.
And they're trying to help each other across that line. But there's always a couple of hundred absolutely broken, shattered people who didn't make it.
Fantastic. And I've also heard that there's like 100,000 people in the stadium, at least when the winner comes in. So there's
on the roads, there'd be 500,000 spectators the whole way. So the whole way down the road, people do what you call barbecue. In South Africa, we call it a braai.
Yeah.
A barbecue is a watered down version of a braai. A braai is a braai. I can't explain it to you. And that's a South African tradition.
Sure, you got to be there.
It usually follows a great victory in rugby. When our national team, the Springboks, wins a great game, everybody will braai.
Yeah.
But on Comrades Day, they do the entire length of the field, spectators the whole way, screaming and shouting. But similar, to the big city marathons that you run, where there's wonderful spectator support. And it's a huge day now. And the Comrades winner will be a hero, heroine for the next year, the defending champion.
Yeah, well,
and
thanks for
there've been some US winners.
Yeah.
The
Camille
first
Herron. In fact, I was texting or emailing with Camille to sort of get her insights and maybe some inspiration for questions to talk about with you. But I'd love to linger on the political situation, because I also reached out to some of your South African fellow compatriots, Ryan Sands, Dean Leslie, Stu McConaughey, and they all mentioned the 1981 race where you ran with a black armband on. This was your first victory at Comrades. I'd love to hear you talk about what the atmosphere was like with apartheid at the time and why you felt compelled to take that stand.
So apartheid was still very much in place, but now black runners were allowed to run and women were allowed to run. But what happened in 81 was the government, the nationalist government at the time, decided to celebrate 20 years of apartheid rule, of their rule of South Africa, of their governing South Africa. And so they had a big, basically it was celebration for a few months with tank parades and fly pasts and politicians giving speech and cultural events and some sporting events that were all linked to this particular celebration of 20 years of apartheid. And unfortunately, and it's to Comrades' eternal shame, actually, the Comrades Marathon agreed to be part of those celebrations. Mm-hmm. So there were a whole lot of runners that withdrew in protest. They were appalled. And the slogan at the time was no cause to celebrate. There was no cause to celebrate. We were the polecats of the world. We were isolated. We couldn't compete internationally. We had to turn inland. You were always, if you were traveling overseas, you were embarrassed to say you were a South African. Yeah. You said you pretended you were an Australian because our accent to most other people is similar. Yep. So that was, and obviously we had appalling, people were dying in detention. There was detention without trial, a lot of stuff like that. And I was still at university, so I was quite passionate. So what happened was a group of us decided we still wanted to run, and me particularly because I knew I could win, because I had come second and third in the 2 previous years. And I knew I had a really good chance of winning, and my training showed me that I was in great shape. So we decided we would run, but we would show our displeasure by wearing black armbands. So I wasn't the only person. It's just that I was the most prominent because I won. And then, and because I won, that it was very, a lot of people noticed it, because there's no way the national television broadcasting company could film the race without filming me. They tried not. They try to film me from the side that didn't have the armband on. But then I would swap the armband to that side. But it was a very unhappy race for me, because I was with the largely white spectators on the side of the road. I was I was hated.
Right.
So I was booed, and I got hit with a couple of eggs, and I got hit with a tomato or two, and I was not. I was intensely disliked for what I did. But what happens is that in later years, I found out that the political prisoners on Robben Island, they were absolutely amazed that there were white people running the race who were standing up for them. So. Wow. Many years later, I received a state president's award from Nelson Mandela And I think largely because of that stand, so once he was released. But what happens as we know, with all winners is, so people hated me. The following year, I remember when I was running, a couple of people shouted, "Where's your black armband today, Fordyce?" And I always used to put my hand on my heart and say, "It's right here in my heart." But then what happens when you win for the second time and then you win for the third time? Everyone starts to love a winner. Where you see it quite often. You see it in things like the tennis, where the new champion, no one likes them because they still like the old guy or the old world champion. But then gradually the new one wins the hearts of people. So that kind of was my story. That then by the time I'd won the third time, I think some people had already forgotten those issues. And then, of course, as I was winning, South Africa was approaching the unbanning of the African National Congress, the freeing of Mandela and the other political prisoners. It was getting closer to that time.
Yeah, but that took a long time still. So I'd love to, if we could spend a little bit more time on this subject, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that history, because I think it's a great illustration of how sport can be a unifying force in the world, and especially in your country. And I, of course, have also seen the movie Invictus about the 1995 World Cup rugby. And so there was a 14-year gap, though, between your 1981 victory at Comrades and that 1995 World Cup, which, was, of course, a really important moment in the apartheid history as well.
Sure,
Could you talk more about that?
But the end was coming. There were. I mean, in 1981. There was one person of color in the South African rugby team, and by the time you get to 90, if you look today, I mean, I don't even, we just look at our team. That's our team. We don't really know. I mean, that's the team. From 81 until about 85, it got more and more brutal and more repressive. But then after that, I think the floodgates started to open, where you just could see that the end was coming of the system of apartheid. And 1990 is the unbanning of the ANC and the freeing of Mandela and that. So I still won that Comrades. In 1990 was my last Comrades win. So I kind of just touched in the era of freedom, so to speak.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, it's an incredible history. And I think, like I said, a great example of how sport can sometimes be a unifying force, and something that helps inspire people towards justice and what is right.
Well, so I'm sure you saw in the movie Invictus, probably the greatest move that Mandela made was to wear a South African Springbok jersey onto the field to meet the teams. That was just absolutely mind-bogglingly clever. Yeah. In one move, he had all the right wingers who would have hated him would have said, "Oh, well, he's not such a bad guy. Look at that." He's and in the other move, that was
kind of his brilliance as a leader, wasn't it?
He had a special touch for everyone. I once boarded a plane with him. I missed my flight. I missed my flight from a place called Port Elizabeth to Johannesburg, but I got there late, and the check-in lady said to me, "You know what, you're very lucky because the flight hasn't taken off, and we've got a VIP who's flying, so you can go and join the VIP because we're about to call him out to board the flight." And it was Mandela. So I walked, this is the man. So we walked towards the plane on the tarmac, on the apron, towards the plane, and all the people were looking out the window. And Mandela and I, he was very tall, much taller than me. We're talking away and we're chatting away as we walk. And he said to me, "Bruce, I bet you all the people in the plane are saying, who's that funny old gray-headed man with the famous Bruce Fordyce?"
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for talking about that a little bit. I think the intersection of sports and culture and politics is a really interesting thing to talk about. And you were certainly at the intersection of that during the height of your career. Let's talk more about Comrades specifically. I know you had a very successful formula with your training that you implemented very successfully over the course of your consecutive victories. And I'd love to hear you kind of talk about it, because I think you've also exemplified just longevity and health span in your running career, and that remarkable consistency of 8 victories in a row probably indicates that you had a really smart approach to your training. I'd love to hear you reflect on that.
Yeah, so it wouldn't so much be my training. It was that I think it was my racing. If I have one criticism of the modern runners, they run too many. They just run too many, and eventually, everyone thinks they can reinvent the wheel, and they can't. Sorry, they don't run too many; they race too many.
Okay,
and especially these insane ultras, 100 miles and trail races and stuff. You have to be selective. You have to ration yourself to a couple a year. If you do that, you will get the results every time. If you learn how to peak, you will get the results every time. But there's so many who, and I don't want to get in the way of spontaneity, but they will just say, oh yeah, come on, let's go and do that race. I mean, we get it here in South Africa. And then they wonder why, when they get to the one that they really want to do well at, they're dead when they get there, and it doesn't work. Why? And it's because you're just overdoing it. That's it. So I used to kind of choose 2 ultras a year. And in the latter part of my running career, only one. I would do, in those days, I would run Comrades, which was the end of May. And then they had a race, which sadly no longer exists, called the London to Brighton, which is almost the same length as Comrades. And that was beautifully positioned in October, first weekend of October. And I would run it, and I would run those 2. And I'd recover from the one and then slowly build up for the second one. So I think that was probably it. Also, because I hit on a good training formula, I stuck to it. I tinkered with it a little bit. You'll change it a bit here and you think I need a couple more long runs, but basically that was it. And it's funny you should ask that, because here's my very scientific, I'll show you. This is my very scientific, here you go. That's my training diary.
There's the training log. What year is that from?
This is 1985. Okay, so there you are. The red is a race.
Yeah, okay.
The red ink is a race. And this is actually 1985 Comrades. So,
Bruce, that notebook belongs in the Smithsonian or some very special history museum.
And then I'm really strange because I would also do, but what happens is then I could go back and refer to those the next year and see what I did. So there is all my, here you are. Here's how I logged all my kilometers.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you for showing that to me. I mean, that thing belongs in the running and sporting history museum.
I got a whole pile of them.
It's older than I am. So.
Yeah. But I've got, that's the ridiculous thing. That's 85. Yeah. But at my feet is 2022.
Okay, great. So you're still doing it the old-fashioned way. Pen and paper.
Yeah. I can't look it up, and because then I won't be able to find it, and one day I'll lose it all.
That's
Some
great.
of those pages are quite interesting because the ink is all blurred because I was writing down, and then a bead of sweat would go and land on the page and make the ink run.
Yeah. So Bruce, in this line of questioning, and in the line of your point about people overtraining and over racing, and while we're talking about the formula that you came up with that was so successful for Comrades, I'd love to read something from the lore of running and ask you to expand on it, relevant to your training. And
by the way, I'm not alone. If you look at Eliud Kipchoge,
yep,
he's so successful because he runs 1 or 2 a year marathons. Right. I don't know what his next one's going to be. I'm hoping it's Boston.
Yeah, we all hope it's Boston.
Yeah, because that's the thing that's missing from his career, from his CV.
Yeah, exactly.
And then after that, I hope the next one after that is the following year's New York.
Yep. We'd love to see him race in the United States, speaking for all American running fans. But so again, your training was really captured by Tim Noakes and the lore of running. But I think I'll just read a quick passage here and then you can expand on it. What it says is, Bruce was particularly impressed by Dave Levick's Comrades performance in 1971 when, on a grand total of 130 kilometers of training in January and February, he ran one of the great Comrades, finishing second in 5 hours, 48 minutes. Yeah. and going on to win the 1971 London to Brighton race, which you just mentioned. Thus, Fordyce concluded that the high training mileage in January and February was probably not necessary. So can you expand on that and your general philosophy of moderation?
8 to 10 weeks.
Yeah.
That was my 8 to 10 weeks. So by that, what I mean is you don't do no running, but you run and you tick over. And actually in my off season, I used to kind of go and run B League track races. So I had spikes. I would go and run a 5,000 meter the B League, not with the really great guys, but they had some track meets where they would have like an A, B, C, and D race. And you could say, well, this is the time I'm going to think I can run, give or take a few seconds, and they'd put you in that race. So I would continue to run, but when it became time to really push hard and work hard, I used to restrict it to 8 to 10 weeks. That was it. That's intense training, and that's allowing for, I'm quite conservative, allowing for a 2 to 3 week taper till race day, with a couple of short distance races to sharpen up. So everyone wants to know that, most runners, they want to know that they're ready to run a 90 kilometer race by running a long run and feeling great. I didn't need to do that. I knew I'd done the training. What I needed to know was, can I break 30 minutes for 10Ks? If I could break 30 minutes for 10Ks with 2 weeks to go to Comrades, I'm not telling you I'm going to win because that would be too arrogant, but I'm going to run 5.5 hours.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm going to run 5.5 hours. So if you run 5:28, you'll beat me, but I'm going to run 5.5. There you go. How do you know? Because my training's told me.
Right.
You know, that it's that simple.
Brilliant.
But I need to find that out by doing a long distance run. I need to find it out by doing a short, sharp run. And that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah. I just think that you're such a great, example of longevity and consistency. And I think it's so hard for top athletes to accomplish that. And so the moderation that you employed in your training was also supported by an amazing strategy that you employed very successfully year over year at Comrades. And of course, I was never around to witness any of your victories. I've sort of pulled some things off YouTube, but from what I've heard, you always raced fairly conservatively, fairly tactically, and fairly intelligently. Could you talk about that strategy?
Yeah, so I do a lot of speaking now. In fact, funnily enough, did one last night for a whole bunch of runners. And I tell them, particularly with Comrades, the only tactic, the only approach to the race is to start like a coward and finish like a hero. It's 90 kilometers of hell. Mm-hmm. It's hilly. It's hot. It can get incredibly hot, African heat. I mean, it's run in the winter in KwaZulu-Natal, but that's a subtropical province, so it's hot. You start slowly and you gradually pick it up. As you start to think, okay, I'm feeling this is not too bad. That hill went well. Then you can start to pick it up. But what happens is that you watch the start of the Comrades Marathon. It's bizarre. You have to break the 4-minute mile barrier to be on television for the first mile. They take off, they're out of there. You know? And you think, guys, even if you win, it's 5.5 hours of running it. And by the way, it's not that it's slow. You know, it's 3 minutes 30, 3 minutes 35 a kilometer. I don't know what it is in miles, but that's not that slow. So, you know, when I say start like a coward, I mean, it's a relative term. You're still going out quite fast, but just for that. You have to, after 20 kilometers of that race, you have to feel like you haven't started. You must just feel like you're not even breathing. Your legs are feeling great. And then you start thinking about what the possibilities are.
So how many of your victories were come from behind victories? Because I know that you were famous for shaking hands with the leader as you passed them to secure another championship. How many of those were come from behind?
I think almost all.
Wow.
Almost. And I was able to run negative splits, so I could run the second half faster.
Yeah.
But not that much faster, but I could run it faster. So I'm trying to think, well, yeah, in 1982, there was a lead bunch of runners. It was a down run, and we were all together in a group. And then eventually, on this one steep downhill, the down run defending champion, I'd won the year before, but I hadn't won a down run. Alan Robb took off. He just took off on one of the downhills.
Yeah.
And so you had about 10 seconds to make up your mind, going with him or you were going to wait. and it was 30 Ks to go. And I just thought, no, I'm going with him. So and then we were in the front from quite early on, but I think just with 30 to go. But the best time to take the lead in any marathon is as close to the finish as possible.
Sure.
You want to be in the lead, or why would you want to be in the lead? I used to love that idea of leaving some of my opposition out there, as they say, just hanging them out to dry for a few hours. Just leave them out there for a few hours. They know I'm 2 minutes behind. I'm not far behind. I'm 2 minutes behind. Worst scenario, 3 minutes behind. So I'm there. If we have a long straight, but I can see them, but I just leave them there. Sure. They've got the TV truck. They've got the lead vehicle. They've got all the press taking notes. They've got the crowd going mad. And you're just hiding away happily, almost camouflage, waiting for them, to make the move. And to be in the front for so long, I can't imagine what that must be like.
So winning the race 8 years in a row from 81 to 88, why didn't you come back in 1989?
Because what happened was that we South Africans were arrogantly saying that at that kind of 100K distance, 50 to 100, we're the best in the world. And we had some magnificent runners. I mean, Frith van der Merwe, world record at 50K in the Two Oceans, which is a 56K race we had in Cape Town. Thompson Magawana, world record at 50Ks. I ran some pretty fast times for 90. And then we had incredible Wally Hayward at the age of 80 years old. He ran a 9:45 up Comrades. That means he beat that cutoff gun by 2.25 hours. So we were saying we're the best in the world. And rightly so, the answer was coming back from Europe and from the American runners. Yeah, but none of you have got 100K time. Yeah. You don't have 100K time. How can you say that 100K is the standard distance? Give us 100K time. So what we did is in 1989, we put on a 100K race, and we invited all the top runners from around the world. So Barney Klecker came from the USA, Stefan Fechner from Canada. Quite a lot of the top runners came from all over the world. And we ran a 100K race in a town called Stellenbosch in the Cape. And we had big prize money. It was the first time ever we had big prize money. And I won it. So it was an incredibly hot day. So I did a 6:25 or something. But it was a very funny race because the first 6 runners were all in the hospital tent afterwards, all plugged into IV, all of us getting fluid because it was so hot. Yeah. And so because of that, the race was in February. And given what I've just said about how I peak and how you can't over race, I knew in 89 I would never be recovered in time to run a Comrades in May.
Okay.
And there were some people who thought they could, and they got found out in Comrades, because Comrades is a very selfish race. It's so brutal that if you mess around with other distances and other races too close to Comrades, you're going to get what we call in South African terminology a big club. That's a big whack. Yeah. And that's what happened. So I didn't even bother to enter the 89 Comrades. I just said, no, I'm not going there. And
then
in fact,
came back and won again in 1990.
Then I came back to win in 1990. But by then I noticed, and I think it's a terrible thing for all sportsmen and women, that you just realize it's over.
Really? Talk about that. I'd love to hear more about that.
I won it, but I won it by default because a great runner called Mark Page, he built up a huge lead on me, too much of a lead. But it was an up run, and there's a big hill at the end of the up run called Polly Shorts. It's named after the farmer who used to live there. A strange name, Polly Shorts. But anyway, it's like the Heartbreak Hill of Comrades, but I've run Heartbreak. I've run one Boston. It's much steeper than Boston, and it's 2 kilometers long. So it's a mile essentially, straight up. And Mark started walking on that hill. He broke then, he started walking, and I caught him, and I managed to open up a gap. Because when you get to the top of this hill, it's kind of 4 miles to the end. I caught him then, and I managed to open a gap, and I won it. But my sister, who lives in London, she had never seen me run, and the Comrades. So she came out that year to see me, and she was the first person to hug me, to greet me when I crossed the line. And she reminded me afterwards, I said to her, it's over. I won't win another one. I knew I wouldn't win another one. I'd lost that zip. I'd lost that speed.
How old were you at this time, Bruce?
33. But you see, it's not so much how old are you in age. because older runners have won the Comrades. It's how many times have you stepped in the boxing ring?
Yep.
How many times have you been hit like Muhammad Ali? And unfortunately for me, by the time I got to 1983, I'd been hit a lot.
Yeah.
You know? And so the zip was gone out of my legs. And it's the most astonishing thing. You can see it happen to a runner. They're just gone. I hope it doesn't happen to Eliud Kipchoge. I hope he's got a couple more. But you're going to see one day it's just not going to happen for him.
Sure.
And then your response is, you go back and you think, no, it's just being lazy. I've got to train even harder. So you train even harder, and the following year you have an even worse result.
Yeah.
Because it's over. You know, I've got a great friend who was at university with me, Gary Bailey. He's well known in the UK because he was the goalkeeper for the football team, Manchester United, and he was goalkeeper for England in the football. And he just said one day he was diving to save a shot at goal, and he didn't save it. It bent the tips of his fingers back and it went in. And he said, I realized I'm just not quite as sharp as I was last season.
Wow.
And he kind of planned his retirement. From then on, he knew, I'm just not diving as far across the goal as I used to. And it's going, well, I would have stopped that 2 years ago.
Bruce, this is fascinating. And maybe to go one level deeper, even when you recognize that it was over, you then still had 15 or 18 Comrades finishes after the fact. You have 30 finishes in 35 years between 77 and 2012. Talk about when you realized that it was over, like keeping the love of running, because I don't think that's all that common, especially with athletes of your level.
I just could never not run. And so what I said at the time, I'm giving myself permission to be slow. I don't care if I'm slow. I just want to be out there, and I love it. And I think the other runners that, I don't want to use the word ordinary, but you know what I mean? The kind of the runners who can never win, they really enjoy seeing someone like me there. And I'm further back in the field. I'm talking, I'm giving them advice, I'm chatting to them. And I could never, I mean, if I stopped, my family would put me down like an old dog because I would be so grumpy. I'd become an alcoholic, and I would just, it would be too awful for words. And, you know, the only thing is eventually at Comrades, I made a decision to stop eventually because I was badly needed in the commentary box.
Yeah.
I've got more to give in the commentary box because I know the race so well. I know the history. I know every inch of the road. So it was better. And I couldn't have chosen a better way to end it because I finished my last Comrades with Zola Budd.
Okay.
I caught Zola with 20 Ks to go that year. And she had gone out ahead of me. It was her first Comrades. It was my 30th. And I remember thinking, how can you do that, Zola? You know me. I'm experienced. What are you doing ahead of me? And I went straight past her, and I'd gone past her, and I thought, don't be stupid. I stopped. I said, if you're not going to win, this is the greatest marketing opportunity of a lifetime. You finish Comrades with Zola, the crowd's going to go mad, the press is going to go mad. And it was right. All the newspapers, was a big photograph of me giving Zola a kiss on the cheek when we crossed the line.
Yeah.
And the poor runner who won it was, I think, Ludwig Mamabola, who won that year. He got a little mention, but like this, he was so angry with us. So that was kind of, but I still run. And, you know, you mentioned Parkrun. That's now my passion. 5Ks free on a Saturday morning. And we should call it Park Walk because many of our people walk.
Sure.
And I still try and run that thing, and I will try and win my age group, you know, whatever. And I love it. I've done 453 parkruns now, something like that.
Wow. Yeah, I'd love to. I don't know if we'll have enough time to talk about Parkrun, and I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about trail and some specific, really important anecdotes. Ryan Sands, who's a really good old friend of mine, we sort of came up in the sport together, or it's around the same time. He always tells a story about how when you were doing a book signing, you signed a book for Ryan Sands that said, "To Ryan, a future Western States champion."
Yes.
This is well before he made that prediction a reality. I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit more about that anecdote. But also, I heard that you were on the start list at Western States one year. So if you could talk about that interaction with Ryan and also your failed attempt at Western States.
Yes, I love the Western States. I went back in 1984, 85, maybe it was 85. I was what we call a second. I think you call them a pacer.
Yes.
A pacer for a South African runner who ran there. And I landed up, because he had a tough time, I landed up carrying a lot of his stuff. And so I did about 60 miles of the Western States, walking, jogging, carrying his stuff. I don't know. And I loved it. I mean, it was just too beautiful for words. All those Red Star Ridge and Devil's Thumb and Rucky Chucky and all those names.
Look, so, you can recite all the aid stations. That's amazing.
I know them all. And I love the fact that it started in Squaw Valley and finished in Auburn, Sacramento, and I love that. And so in my glaring omission from my CV was just to get a Western States buckle, to get the belt. I would have, I would literally 27 hours, because I am an appalling trail runner. I hate trail. I fall all the time. I can't see. I love the road. I love the track. I like a firm surface. But I decided I was going to do it, and they accepted my entry. And then, as it was getting time, my knee packed up.
Yeah,
I lost half the cartilage in my one knee, and it broke my heart, because I was already doing running at night with a headlamp so that I could get used to it, because I know you have to do that in Western State. Yeah. I was ready to go, and I would have made it. But I would have made it with 5 minutes to spare. That would have been my goal.
Yeah.
But then, because I know Ryan so well, a few years later. And by the way, I still want to come to Western States to be a spectator.
We would love to have you. We would love to have you.
I want to come and give a talk on running and just be a spectator. I'd love it, or be a pacer for somebody like Camille or somebody like that. Anyway, I'd love to do that. So please, if there's anybody, I'll pay my own way over. I just want to come over.
2023, let's do it, Bruce. We'll talk about it offline. Talk about the Ryan Sands interaction, because I really want to hear about this.
I knew Ryan is our best trail runner, if not one of the best. He is one of the best in the world.
Yeah.
And I just wanted, and he'd come close. I think he'd come close a couple of times.
He was second in 2012.
Yeah, he was second. So it was like, come on, Ryan. I've also been second in the Comrades, and I know what it feels like. Second, excuse the language, second sucks. It's horrible. Nobody likes being second. And so I just put that there to goad him, and a couple of years later he did it. So, well, and that's not to say he couldn't do another one. I still think he's got a chance that there's another one in him.
Yeah. So also a great American champion, Jim Walmsley, managed to break your 50-mile world record, which had stood for, how long was it? Like 35 years by the time I think it was 1984 that you set it. He broke the record in 2019. So I think that's 35 years, at the risk of doing public math. But I'd love to hear you talk about that, maybe that performance from 1984, and then, what it felt like to finally have that mark beaten by the best of our generation.
I wrote a nice piece on it, actually, that I wrote a letter to Jim saying, well done.
I know you did, and he very much appreciated it.
Yeah. So funny enough, I'm never quite sure when I got this world best time, because I ran the London to Brighton, which is 53 miles, and they took my time going through 50 miles. So I broke the record there, but London to Brighton's point to point. So I ran, and I have to try and remember it, but something 4 hours, 50 minutes and 21 seconds, something like that. And then the following year in Chicago, what was then called the AMJ Ultras, it was the US 50-mile champs, I ran 4 hours and 50 minutes and 51 seconds.
Yeah.
So 30 seconds slower, but it was a out and back, it was a loop course that you just said. It was like 5 mile loops.
Right.
So that's probably the one. And then, and my attitude to it is that it's not good when you hold a record for so many years. It means the sport's not growing. It means the sport's not thriving. And the great Wally Hayward, who I mentioned earlier, he won the Comrades 5 times when he was a younger man, but he's most famous for running it at the age of 80. He said to me, Bruce, you keep titles, but you borrow records. Mm. You borrow a record and you look after it and you treasure it for a while, but then you got to hand it on because somebody takes it. But the title no one can take away. I don't know what year Ryan Sands won Western States, but let's say it was 2016. He will always be the 2016 Western States champion. That's it. That's it. You know.
Yeah.
So you keep the title, but you borrow the record, and I think that's quite a good way. And somebody will take it away from Jim Walmsley. You know, probably quite soon.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I think it was a very, you know, classy, again, example of sportsmanship and just like your personality to reach out to Jim upon setting that record and congratulating him and passing that baton to the next generation. And I'm sure Jim will do the same for whoever comes along and takes the record from him. Yeah. So
you can either get grumpy about it and get upset, or you can just accept it. And I knew when I heard that Jim was going for it and it was a kind of like an organized run where he was going to go for it, I knew that's it. I'm doomed.
But it wasn't by that big of a margin. I mean, I think it was only 30 or 40 seconds at the end of the day.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot, but anyway. Whatever, that's it. Yeah.
So I know we've only got a few minutes of time remaining, and I'd love to use that time to talk more about Parkrun and to talk about your commentary and also to just generally discuss the post-pro athlete life, because I think you've done such a good job of staying connected to the community, staying relevant and still passionate clearly about what you're doing. So if you could just talk a little bit about Parkrun, about what you do with the media and how that sort of came about after your career.
Parkrun, by the way, is in the States. It's just not big yet, but it's getting there. It's getting there. So it's 5Ks free on a Saturday morning around a safe, traffic-free environment. You register and you just arrive with your barcode. So there's my barcode. I never take it off because I'm too scared I'll lose it. But you can also have a little paper barcode. It's just like a credit card. Yeah. And that gets scanned when you cross the finish line and you get your result. And then if you come back the next week and you run a PB, you get a result and it says, well done, you got a PB. And it's for runners and walkers of all ability. So in the front, there's some very quick guys and girls. But at the back, you'll get, you know, Mrs. Smith, who walks the whole way and doesn't even break an hour for 5Ks. And it started off in the UK by a South African called Paul Sinton Hewitt. 13 people came in October 2004, and now it's 8 million. It's 8 million people globally. And in South Africa, we started, 26 people came to our first one. And now we're 1.3 million registered members. And this Saturday, I already know which one I'm going to. I'm going to a parkrun called the Reeds, which is in a poor community in a township. It started about 3 weeks ago, and I want to go there and give them some support. And I know it's not going to be a pretty parkrun. It'll be ugly. There'll be litter. There'll be a rusting bicycle on the one corner, but it'll be fun because the community will be very welcoming. And so the parkruns in South Africa, for instance, are scattered all over the place. Some are on the beaches, some are in wine estates, some are on the borders of our great game reserves, the Kruger National Park. We've had a parkrun that had to start late because there were 5 lions lying in the road on the road to the parkrun. So they weren't on the parkrun route, but there were 5 lions lying in the road and they wouldn't let any of the cars go past. So that's it. You can't get out of your car and tell a lion, we need parkrun.
Excuse me, we've got a parkrun to do here.
Yeah. So and it's just exploded. It's the most incredible things. People just love it. And then there's a whole hashtag group of people who go hashtag parkrun to proper runner, to sensible run, hashtag parkrun to comrades. We've had people who've started, they never knew they do 5Ks, and 18 months later they run a 90-kilometer race, and you can't believe it. But mainly it's about communities, about people getting together. And if I had to use one adjective to describe parkrun, it's a corny one, but the right adjective is happy. People are just really happy to see each other on a Saturday morning, have a run, go for coffee afterwards, catch up with each other, see you next week. Which one are you going to do? And so it's amazing, and it's growing, it's exploding in the States and in Canada. So it'll be good to see those grow. In fact, one which closed down sadly was Chrissy Fields. Chrissy Fields Park. Yeah. They had to close it down because parkrun is always free, and the authorities there wanted to charge the parkrunners. But it had been going for a couple of years, and it was on my bucket list to do it. So I'm a bit annoyed because to do it in the looking at Golden Gate would be amazing.
Yeah, that is a spectacular setting. Well, let's work together to bring it back, Bruce.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. Hey, I know you've got to go, but I'm so appreciative of your time, Bruce. I feel like we could go another hour, but I really appreciate you coming on the show. It's been an honor and a pleasure to chat with you.
Can I have one quick plug?
Please.
Just give me 1 second. I suddenly realized I'm being silly. For anyone who wants to run their first Comrades Marathon, there it is.
Oh, there we go. The Winged Messenger.
Yeah,
okay.
Based on my first Comrades Marathon, and called Winged Messenger, which sounds very pretentious title.
Yeah.
But Winged Messenger is the logo on the Comrades badge on the medal. Yep. And the Winged Messenger is Hermes, and he was the god of the roads. That's why it's Winged Messenger. Anyway, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you for that plug, Bruce. We'll make sure to put it in the show notes to direct our audience to pick up your book. But again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Fantastic. Thanks.